Teotihuacán, place where the gods were made, city of the gods.
The terrible news that I just found out.
The name of the place is of Nahuatl origin and was used by the Mexicas, but it's unknown what its inhabitants originally called it. Much of the information about Teotihuacán comes from the Mexica or Aztecs, who gave the great city this name when they occupied it and realized the colossal effort that had gone into creating it. Teotihuacán, being one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world, came to concentrate a population of up to more than 100,000 inhabitants at its peak. The great city had abundant natural resources, and it was also among the Mesoamerican societies one of the most influential in the political, economic, commercial, religious, and cultural spheres. Since 1987, Teotihuacán has been on the UNESCO World Heritage List. It is the most visited pre-Columbian site and perfectly communicated the Veracruz coast with this gigantic urban esplanade, which became the most important in Mesoamerica. The citadel is one of the most notable sets of built structures in Teotihuacán. It consists of 4 platforms in the form of walls, measuring 400 meters each, and which in turn enclose the complex. Its impressive architecture, and due to its location in the center of the city, it's been said that this complex functioned as the residence of the rulers. On the colossal platforms, there are 15 temples that show the typical characteristics of Teotihuacán architecture, and in which public ceremonies were held. It is here where we can admire the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, also known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, the Adosada Pyramid, a large plaza, a shrine in the center of the plaza, the superimposed altars building, and 2 housing complexes located on either side of the pyramid. There are polychrome remains of paint that are preserved both in the reliefs of the facades of the temple and on the walls of the older construction levels of the residential complexes. The Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent is one of the oldest buildings in the city and one of the most striking. It was originally built in 7 architectural levels with the talud tablero design typical of this city. The decoration is made up of a series of sculptures of 2 divine monsters alternating on the board, while on the slopes of each body, carved in low relief, there is a feathered serpent in profile. Both have a representation of marine elements as a background. The building is of solid construction, made of stones. A series of offerings containing mainly human remains were found, offerings dedicated to the construction of the building or to the deity. In the Museum of Teotihuacán culture, there are 2 reproductions of these offerings, which represent a sample of the human sacrifice practiced in Teotihuacán for religious purposes. The same temple was previously known as the Temple of the Frog and was built between 150 and 250 AD. Without a doubt, it is one of the buildings with the most beautiful and complex decorations of the pre-Hispanic era. And it was an absolute beauty, since it was painted in intense colors. It is the 3rd largest building in Teotihuacán, after the pyramids of the sun and the moon, but it is also the most splendid. It used to have 7 lavishly decorated bodies. The snakes found on the boards carry a headdress on their backs. This was attributed for many decades to the face of Tlaloc. Today, it is thought that this headrest is in the shape of a reptile head without a jaw and with obsidian eyes and 2 rings on the forehead corresponds to Zipactli, the monster of the earth. Some of the terrible news that I just found out is that people are not allowed to climb up the Pirámide del Sol or Pirámide de la Luna. And this is because they are getting too damaged by the people. This might be bad news in a way, but good news in a different way. So there it is. The building alludes to the myth of the creation of time and the calendar, and to the feathered serpent over the rulers. However, the consecration burials deposited on the sides and vertices of the building could symbolize Tonacatepetl, the mythological sacred mountain that was the center of the universe. Around the year 400, a great change occurred in the political and religious structure. The great temple of Quetzalcoatl was covered with another building, the Plataforma Adosada, which could indicate an intention to silence the political message associated with the feathered serpent. La Calzada de los Muertos, the Causeway of the Dead, between the Pyramid of the Sun and the San Juan River, is divided into three sections. There is the Calle de los Muertos complex, composed of pyramidal bases with temples at the top, squares, streets, stepped platforms, and residential spaces arranged around central squares. Teotihuacán was rebuilt on itself. 8 different construction stages have been distinguished. This set is formed by a platform that is the access from the Calzada de los Muertos. On the platform there are 3 pyramidal bases, and from there you enter a large plaza and the rest of the complex, made up of rooms, lobbies, corridors, and other spaces of political, administrative, and residential nature. The West Plaza consists of a large patio with an altar, surrounded by 3 temples, in which rooms and patios are arranged. In some of them, numerous grinding stones, sculptures, battlements, and domestic ceramics were found. Recent excavations have exposed 2 of its construction stages. One of its temples has large snake heads, and below a previous construction, another decorated with forked-tongued snake heads. In the East Plaza, the Temple of Tlaloc stands out, and structure 1G, on whose north facade was the mural of geometric figures in the form of a chessboard. The architectural complex is one of the most explored so far. It can be accessed from the Calzada de los Muertos through a staircase that communicates with several rooms and wide porticoed spaces to reach the main square, where its central shrine is located. On each of the pyramidal bases were the temples dedicated to religious worship. The square is the central element of distribution. It communicates with other sections of the complex through corridors, porticos, and rooms facing the secondary patios, in accordance with the classic Teotihuacán urban distribution. And the biggest attraction of Teotihuacán, for which everyone comes from all over the world. The Pyramid of the Sun is the largest building in Teotihuacán and one of the largest in the pre-Hispanic world. Its construction began in the year 1st AD, when Teotihuacán began to develop as a highly relevant city in Mesoamerica. It's 65 meters high. There used to be a temple and an idol statue that added to its already titanic proportions. Now only a square platform with a rather irregular surface remains. It was built on top of a previous temple. Its base of 225 meters per side can be compared to the Cheops Pyramid. For this monumental building of 2.5 million tons to be built, it took about 30 years and 5 construction phases. You can't tell anymore, but it was all covered with paintings on stucco. The east-west alignment is not accidental. It's part of the astrological meaning of the temple, the fact that it is oriented as a perfect axis between the 4 cardinal points. In 1971, due to excavations, a grotto was discovered under the pyramid, whose 4 doors are oriented like the petals of a flower, through which other rooms are accessed. To reach the cave, you must cross a 22 feet long shaft that is located at the foot of the pyramid steps. The stairway used to have 260 steps, which corresponded to 52 steps for each sun or era. And when we are in the 5th sun, it results in that number of steps. Today, it only has 238. Since 2010, excavated tunnels have been found inside, and offerings found inside the Great Pyramid of the Sun are being investigated. In 2012, perforations were made from the top inwards, and the cuneiform structures discovered are still being investigated. The pyramid was deliberately built in a place where it was possible to align it with the sunrises and sunsets on specific dates, recorded by a series of architectural orientations in Mesoamerica. Located to the south of the Pyramid of the Sun is the Museum of the Site, which helps us understand the construction and evolutionary stages of Teotihuacán. The sculptures of the attached platform were part of the friezes that adorned the boards of the platform attached to the Pyramid of the Sun. They represented feline figures, exceptionally adorned with feathers and associated with some reptilian elements. The ornamentation of the friezes was complemented with stars and geometric figures. These fragments contain some elements such as large cat heads, their paws and claws, rattlesnakes and bands with feathers. The large stone blocks with circles or chalchihuites correspond to the moldings of the boards. The mural of the Puma is an example of what the entire city was presumed to look like. This segment that has been preserved from some 18 centuries was underground, so the elements did not affect it enough for it to be lost, like most of the other Teotihuacan paintings. The Pyramid of the Moon measures 45 meters in height and 140 by 150 meters in base. It marks the northern limit of the Calzada de los Muertos, which gives it a high symbolic meaning, and is the most outstanding element of the most harmonious urban spaces in the city, the Plaza de la Luna. This wide space, which is surrounded by 13 bases with the typical Teotihuacan architectural characteristics, constituted an unbeatable setting for public rituals. At the foot of the pyramid is Structure A, framed by 2 bases, inside which there are 9 altars arranged on the walls, plus 1 in the center, symbolizing the cardinal and intercardinal directions and the center of the universe. The Pyramid of the Moon was the starting point from which the Teotihuacanos erected their sacred capital. The National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico confirmed that under the Pyramid of the Moon there is an artificial cave and secret passages. The cave is 15 meters deep. It is located towards the center of the current structure and oriented towards the Cerro Gordo. Tunnels and secret passageways were also found under the pyramids of the Sun and Quetzalcoatl, probably dedicated to religious ceremonies about the underworld, fertility, and the creation of humanity. The historical impact of this discovery opens discussion about the symbolic significance of this pyramid and the origins of urban planning on the site. The Palace of Quetzalpapalotl still conserves some murals in the structures of the building. The main entrance is on the Calzada de los Muertos and is southwest of the Pyramid of the Moon. The preserved structures were built around AD 450 to 500. These buildings were built on even older structures, from 250 to 300 AD. Due to the location of the palace and the quality of its art, it is believed that the complex was the home of a high-ranking priest or other person of important rank. The complex may also have been used for ceremonial purposes. The name Quetzalpapalotl comes from the sculptures of mythological birds on the patio pillars and comes from the Nahuatl Quetzali, precious feather, and Papalotl, butterfly. The courtyard of the pillars is surrounded by porticos that frame the entrances to the interior chambers of the palace. The stone columns are profusely carved with representation of butterflies and quetzal feathers, hence the name of the place. During the time this building was in operation, the reliefs of the columns were polychrome. Abandoned in the 7th century and later inhabited by the Aztecs, the warrior people who consolidated what is now central Mexico. Teotihuacán still keeps endless secrets. Very little is known about the ethnic and linguistic origin of the Teotihuacans. What is known is that the Aztecs themselves were impressed with such a civilization. The end of the Teotihuacan civilization has the same gaps as its creation. It is believed that at some point there were massive riots, the origin of which could be in the collapse of the economy and climate changes. One of the versions says that the maintenance of the buildings covered in lime require wood fuel for their production. Therefore, the deforestation of the environment could lead to problems of agricultural subsistence, and thus break the economic chain to the decline of the Teotihuacan civilization. Something very important to consider is that to get from one point to another, it might take a lot of walking. Keep in mind that the distances between temples and pyramids are quite long. In total, from one end to the other and back is 4 kilometers. So, take an umbrella, hat, and some drinking water. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it.